Welcome to today's Global Connections program. I'm Bill Miller. How rapidly are landfills around the world filling up? What is one young entrepreneur doing to remind us there are many ways that we can cut back on trash and garbage and recycle many of the products that we use? We'll be back in just a moment to talk about these and other important issues. Welcome back to our program. A major environmental problem we're confronting is how rapidly the landfills, not only in the United States, but around the world, are filling up with trash and garbage. Today we're going to take a look at this very important problem and what possibly we can do about it. My guest today is an expert on this issue. My guest today is Lauren Singer. Lauren Singer is author of the Zero Waste blog, Trash is for Tossers, and she is the founder of organic cleaning product company, the Simply Company. Lauren Singer is an environmental studies graduate from NYU and a former sustainability manager at the New York City Department of Environmental Protection. Lauren Singer, welcome to today's Global Connections program.
Thank you for having me.
I appreciate you being with me today. Lauren, let's jump right into this. How large of a problem is this? I mentioned about the landfills around the world. If you just look at the United States alone, we're 5% of the world's population. We produce 40% of the trash that goes out, and other countries have similar problems. How big of a problem is it?
I mean, it's a huge problem. Landfills are filling up. We're consuming more and more, producing more and more. Climate change is being expedited because of this production. Landfills are filling up. In America alone, the average person produces approximately 4.4 pounds of trash per day, which is a huge amount of waste being put out there. And so the problem just continues to grow.
Exactly. And you figure we have 330 million people, roughly around that amount. So you take 4 times that, it's quite a large quantity.
It's a lot of trash.
It's a lot of trash, no doubt about it. How did you get interested in this topic?
I've always been interested in sustainability, but the actual taking the initiative to reduce my own personal trash output was started when I was in my 3rd year of college. I became interested in the anti-fracking movement, and I realized that I was using a lot of plastic, which was kind of hypocritical because I was against the oil and gas industry. And so I started reducing the amount of trash that I was producing. And the amount of plastic that I was using. And then I was inspired by a girl in one of my classes who was using a ton of plastic and a ton of trash, and I decided to take the initiative into my own hands and live my values for sustainability in my everyday life and go zero waste.
And of course you have a website. It's called www.trashfortossers.com, and our viewers can go to that and get more information on what we're talking about today.
Yes.
What are some of the products that you are using today that you weren't using 15 years ago or something like that to help reduce the production of this garbage and trash and waste? And really, a lot of this stuff like plastic, styrofoam will be in landfills for hundreds of years. It's not like they're papers or they're biodegradable and they'll be gone in 2 or 3 or 4 years. But what are you doing today?
So compared to 15 years ago, I'm using a lot less than I would have normally. Even compared to 3 years ago, I'm using a lot less than I would have. You know, typically I would go to the grocery store and buy anything that was packaged and buy whatever sparked my interest, or I would buy whatever clothes I wanted or whatever things I wanted. But now I've just become more of a minimalist, and I've said no to a lot of those things. So when I go grocery shopping, I'll bring my own reusable bags and my own jars to fill with bulk or unpackaged food, and I'll shop at the farmer's market instead of buying packaged products, and that alone has really helped me reduce how much trash I'm producing. I also make all of my own products. So instead of going to the store and buying plastic packaged, chemical-laden products, I'm buying nothing now, and I'm making everything myself, which really reduces the amount of toxins I'm putting in my body, it reduces the amount of money that I'm spending, and it reduces the amount of trash that I'm putting out into the environment and landfills.
And you brought some of your products with you today and some of the ideas that you're
Yes.
going to share. Let's see if we can go through a few of these. What would you like to start with? Do you want to start with your coffee cup or?
Sure.
Okay.
So
Or
besides
coffee
being
jug, I should
addicted
say.
to coffee, I always bring a mason jar around with me. Single-use products is one of the first things that I eliminated from my life. And so bringing a mason jar gives me the opportunity to say no to single-use items like coffee cups or water bottles, because I can just fill this with coffee at any coffee shop I'd like, or I can fill this with water at any water fountain, and I don't have to spend money on single-use items, and I don't have to throw anything away. So this is a really great tool that I always have with me. I always carry around a fork or a spoon. So again, I can refuse single-use plastic items. And instead of using something like tissues, I'll carry around a handkerchief that I can use for a napkin if I'd like it, for a tissue obviously, or there's even a folding technique that you can use to turn this flat napkin into a bag.
Oh, really? Okay.
So it's
All
a
right.
really great tool.
Very good. And now you also have some soap powder?
Yes.
Yes. What
So-
exactly is that?
When I started living a zero waste lifestyle, I did it because I wanted to decrease the amount of toxins that were entering my life and decrease how much trash that I was producing. But when I looked into it more, I realized that there weren't a lot of options for me to make the transition, which is why I started making a lot of products myself. I couldn't just go to the store and buy, a plastic-free, trash-free beauty product or a plastic-free, trash-free cleaning product. And particularly with cleaning products, I became really interested because I learned that there are 85,000 industrial chemicals that are in use today. And for cleaning products specifically, the manufacturers aren't legally required to disclose the ingredients on the product packaging. So when you buy something, even if it's labeled as sustainable or eco-friendly, you might not be exposed to all of the things that are truly in it, and that was terrifying to me, and I thought that was a huge injustice to consumers. I believe that we have a right to products that are safe for our homes and our bodies and the environment, and knowing that we're being duped when we go shopping for these everyday products and being exposed to toxic chemicals. Again, it's an injustice, and so I decided to quit my job and start a company selling cleaning products that I've been making for years that are safe for your body, safe for the environment. And so I launched with this product. It's a laundry detergent, and it just has 3 ingredients that you can find in your own cabinet to kind of combat the consumerist, toxic, chemical-laden culture that we are living in right now.
And a lot of studies, well, I say a lot, but some of the studies seem to indicate that our food today has many more additives in it than it did perhaps 20, 30, 40 years ago. It's not as natural as it used to be. We're not sure exactly what's in there, but it sounds like it's very important from the consumer protection standpoint to label accurately what's in there, to have, I know the pizza industry fights it every chance it gets to make sure that you don't have the amount of fat and the calories on
But pizza's a vegetable.
That's
so.
true. And it's good food. Everybody likes it. But the point is, it's, as I understand, high in fat and very high in calories.
Yeah.
So, but it's important to let people know what they're eating, is it not?
Absolutely. And people, like I said, are being duped by industries that have profit before the impact that they're having on the people that they're selling their product to. And to me, that's completely unfair, unjust. And that's why I wanted to create a company to ask the questions, why are there so many chemicals in everything? And when did this become okay? And is it necessary to even have them? And by addressing these 3 and growing my company, I'm hoping to expose people to the thought that there's another way to do things.
Now, you would, I think, could be classified a young, social, environmental entrepreneur, if there is such a term.
You have to
If
take
there
a deep
isn't,
breath.
we just
Yeah.
made it up. So we'll go with that. But it sounds like you're doing some really interesting work. It's very important work. Do you find that a lot of younger people, or maybe older people too, more mature folks who've been around longer, are they getting more interested in this as far as learning about what they're eating, what they're using, the impact, the carbon footprint that they're leaving? We all leave a carbon footprint. We can't escape it. But some can leave a light footprint, some can leave a very heavy footprint. But do you find there's more interest in that?
Yeah, I think, ever since the 60s when Rachel Carson came out with Silent Spring, the environmental movement has been prominent, and people are talking more and more about the chemicals that are being used in all aspects of industry and in everyday life. And now food specifically, people are focusing on a lot. And I think, with all of these industries and all of the things that are happening now, it's important to focus on just regulating these things, and it's not happening yet. So hopefully we move towards that.
There's a powerful lobby that wants to make sure it doesn't happen. That's for sure, no doubt about it. The excuse me. There's one other jar that we have not talked about, and that is this one right here. It's a very interesting jar. Has quite a history to it. It goes back 3 years. What exactly is this jar? What's in it? And why is it important that it's such a small jar with very little amount in it?
So this jar right here, this is all of the trash that I've produced in the past 3 years.
All of the trash you've produced?
All of the trash that I've produced. All of the trash that I produce that cannot be recycled, composted, or consumed. So everything in here is plastic, and it's plastic that's not currently recyclable using the New York City recycling infrastructure. So it's all plastic that could technically be recycled, but because the recycled product doesn't have any value because they're not conventionally used plastics, they're thin plastics, no one wants to recycle them, and so they would go straight to landfill. And so I collect them in here to kind of put a spotlight on the things that are small problems but still problems. So there's things like produce stickers and disposable straws, and everything in here is pretty much single waste items.
Now, how do you get rid of all of the other items that you have that you either recycle, or they're biodegradable, or you put them in a compost, or whatever the case might be? But how is that very time consuming, and how do you do that? What is a typical day of recycling like in your life?
Yeah, when people hear that I live a zero waste lifestyle, they're like, this girl has no life. She probably stays at home like counting her pieces of trash all day. That's not the case at all. I have, a full-time job, and I started living this lifestyle when I had a full-time, I was a full-time student, had a full-time job, had a social life. So the best thing that I do is refuse trash. So I go prepared by bringing things like my mason jar and by planning my shopping list before I go grocery shopping to avoid trash. But if there are things that come into my life that I can't avoid, like something like junk mail, for instance, I recycle it. And then for things like food waste, which we all produce, I compost, which alleviates a huge amount of the trash that I produce.
Well, you're watching Global Connections Television, which is an independently produced program. The opinions expressed on Global Connections are solely those of the moderator and his guests. We would encourage our viewers to go to the website at www.globalconnectionstelevision.com and take a look at some of the previous programs. Also, if you have suggestions for future topics and future guests, please advise us, and we will certainly try to get them on the air. Today we're taking a look at really a major problem. That is the amount of waste that we produce, not just in the United States, but around the world, and what can be done to reduce this consumption, and also the problem that it would create for future generations. And my guest today is an expert on this issue. My guest today is Lauren Singer. Lauren Singer is the author of Zero Waste blog, Trash is for Tossers, and she's also the founder of organic cleaning product company, the Simply Company. Lauren, we're talking about the situation with plastics and what have you, and I think we've all seen these horrific islands that are out there floating around plastic, basically milk jugs, whatever, any type of plastic that sort of coagulates and connects with some other plastic out in the Pacific. And these are called what, gyres? Is that
gyres? Yes.
Gyres, Gyres. And I think there are about 5 of them out around the world, and 1 or 2 out in the Pacific, 1 in the Atlantic. Have you had an encounter with these gyres? Have you experienced them, taken a look at them, and what can we do to get rid of them? Because they're killing fish. They're really an environmental hazard, to be quite honest.
So yes, the gyres are areas in the ocean where water actually causes things to get stuck in almost a vortex, and a lot of plastic is ending up there. And I had a firsthand experience visiting one. I visited the Atlantic Gyre a couple of months ago, and I did research on ocean plastic concentration. So we were doing surface trawling and surface skimming, where you take big nets and you go and you ride on in the boat and you pull the net up and you count all of the instances of plastic. And 100% of the time, every single trawl that we did, every area of the ocean we were in, there was plastic on the surface, which was really terrifying to me. Every single place that we sampled, we found plastic. And a lot of people ask me, what's the problem with plastic? Why is it a big deal anyway? You can just recycle it, right? Well, one of the issues of plastic is that it's really toxic to the ocean life. So a lot of the times ocean life will mistake plastic for food and they'll ingest it, which causes them to suffocate because it blocks their ability to process oxygen. And then another thing that happens is the plastic that you can find in the ocean can be up to 1 million times more toxic than the water around it. And so something called bioaccumulation happens. So a small fish will eat a piece of plastic and the bigger fish will eat the small fish, and then the amount of toxins within that organism continues to grow and grow and grow until it reaches our plate. And so we're poisoning ourselves by poisoning the oceans. And so plastic continues to be a hugely growing problem.
Now, many groups are concerned about this. UN, International Maritime Organization, probably the UN Environment Program, I'm assuming, different ones like that. What is being done? It's really up to the countries and to the private sector to try to deal with this. Is anything being done? Are there trawlers out there picking this stuff up to recycle it? It would probably be expensive to do, I would imagine, but still it would reduce some major environmental hazards that are in the ocean. Is there anything being done to try to deal with this problem?
There are companies that are making new products out of recycled ocean plastic. That's definitely a nice Band-Aid, I believe. But, you know, a nice example that a friend of mine that actually went on the research trip that I was on said it's kind of like trying to clean up water coming out of a hose by mopping it up. The way you prevent water from getting onto the sidewalk, you turn off the hose. So the only way to clean up the oceans truly is to prevent plastic from entering it in the first place. And unfortunately, businesses are doing something, but not enough to prevent this from happening. And it's a huge flaw in government because businesses aren't being regulated stringently enough, and they're not being held responsible for the waste that they're putting into the waste stream. So right now, businesses can essentially produce anything. Me and my product, I could produce any kind of product I wanted with any kind of packaging with absolutely no regard for the effects that it'll have on the environment. This is a huge problem. Industry needs to be regulated. They need to be taking a look at not just the product they're creating, but how that product will impact the end user and eventually what happens after the environment. And right now that burden is just being put on the consumer. So we buy a product that a producer makes without having any regulations, and we use it, and we have to pay taxes to provide infrastructure for the government to recycle adequately, or we have to pay for the government to pick up the product to send it to landfill, but the producer can wipe their hands clean. This is a huge problem. If that responsibility was put back on industry, we would have a completely different infrastructure for recycling and a much cleaner environment, I believe.
And some of the cities around the country have already incorporated or implemented laws or municipal statutes indicating that you can't use plastic bags, you have to use paper bags. Some of the grocery stores are going back to the old paper bags, which are problematic to some degree, but they're better than plastic. They won't be there forever, and they are biodegradable, and you can recycle them to some degree. So there are a few things that are actually happening in the positive way, but it's like you mentioned, we all have to participate. And speaking of participating, you mentioned about the private sector. We just saw the COP21 conference, the United Nations, probably the most, I would say, the biggest and most major of the UN conferences on environmental damage and environmental climate change that was recently held in Paris. How important is it to have a conference like that and to focus attention on climate change and the carbon footprint that we make, and also to bring the stakeholders together, not just governments, but the private sector and other groups?
I think it's really important to get the dialogue going, but unfortunately with these conferences, sometimes it's all talk and no action. We saw that in Copenhagen a few years ago. I think the dialogue is a lot larger now. COP21 was an international thing. It wasn't just something that happened and no one talked about it. It's everywhere, which is great. It's creating a conversation, but I'm eager to see what comes out of it, as I'm sure many people are. I wouldn't be so quick to hold my breath.
It's very true. Excuse me. We have to follow up with action. There's no doubt about it. And time is running out. The window is closing on climate change. We see that the glaciers are melting, the seas are rising. We see desertification taking place. Weather patterns are changing. The storms are becoming more violent, more frequent in many areas of the world. And this is just going to accelerate. And one of the arguments we've heard is, well, we can't afford to deal with it now. But the counter argument is, if you don't deal with it now, it's going to be much more costly 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now, especially as Miami and New York City and the countries of the world, any cities down by the coast are building dikes and trying to keep the ocean out. So we've got to move on it, do we not?
Yeah, and that's exactly the problem. No one wants to pay for it. So this is something that more and more people are saying, yes, climate change is real, it's a pressing issue, but who's going to take responsibility for alleviating it? And no one wants to do that because no one wants to pay for it. But I think a great thing that could come out of this conference is that more developed countries will take the initiative to help to create solutions for less developed countries to solve climate change issues. But it's super important that we focus on this now and not just be like we've always been, which is a Band-Aid culture, creating short-term solutions to these problems. Building walls to prevent water from coming into a city might seem like a good solution for right now, but it's not going to prevent water from continuing to destroy cities and destroy areas. So we just have to reduce the amount of carbon that we're emitting into the atmosphere and focus on things like methane emissions, carbon dioxide emissions, and really come together globally to solve this.
Exactly. And of course, the fossil fuels are creating a large part of this, according to scientific data, scientific studies, and coal is a lot of countries are phasing coal out completely. Coal is a dying industry, there's no doubt about it. Oil will probably be next, and gas will be right behind that as we move towards solar plates or thermal or wind power, whatever the case might be. So there is a movement in that direction. There's always that profit motive. Companies operate on profit motives, and I saw some statistics that I think, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but to recycle, a company would earn like $35 for a ton or something like that. To put it in a landfill, it's like $50. To incinerate it, it's like $75. Seems like there's quite an incentive, a financial incentive, to go for the worst of the three options, to incinerate it instead of recycling. Is there any way, is that true, first off?
Well, it depends on what side of the fence you're looking at.
True,
you know, as a taxpayer
right.
and as a government agency, you want to recycle, right? Because it costs less for you. So like I said, you know, the burden is being put on the consumer and the government to provide these solutions, whereas business wants to profit from, you know, having a lot of trash because it's more valuable for them because they get more money per pound than they would recycling. But for us, it makes so much more sense as, you know, someone that lives in a city because it reduces the amount of taxes we have to pay if we're sending less to landfill. So it only makes sense to try to move in that direction.
Now, you've been on a variety of television programs. You've been on ABC, you've been on MSNBC, Fox Business, a variety of others, and talking about what you're doing. Have you noticed an increase in your web activities, or have you found more people who are more interested in what you're doing and would like to learn more about it so that they can perhaps incorporate some of the ideas, some of the suggestions that you've undertaken and implement them in their lives?
Definitely, and I think this is a really great time to talk about that because we have global conversations about things that businesses and government need to do, but we don't see that change really happening right in front of our faces. And so what I like to focus on is what can I do as an individual to implement these values into my everyday life. I can't just rely on government and business to solve the problems that I'm seeing happening in the world. And so that's kind of why I started my blog, to show people you can't just think about something and not do anything to solve it. And so by living zero waste, that's my way to combat climate change. And I think people are starting to catch on to that. My blog has grown exponentially quickly, and I think that's because people really want to do something and they didn't know for a really long time what to do. And so living a zero waste lifestyle and reducing your trash output is a really great way to do that. I get emails every single day from people saying, I was really inspired. I didn't even know that I had the option to not produce garbage. And now they're starting to implement that into their own lives. And I'm really excited to see where that goes. To me, it's not changing a lifestyle into something that's never happened before. I'm just living a lifestyle that was about 50 years in the past, the way that my great-grandmother used to live, without this throwaway culture being slammed, into you every second. So I think people are ready to revert back to this lifestyle, and I think that will have a really positive impact on the environment.
Mm-hmm. And in the last 30 seconds we have, what do you perceive as our number one challenge right now? We've talked about many of these challenges, but as we move forward, what do we need to do to get a grip on this? Hardest question, 30
Who
seconds.
are we?
We, the world, 7.3 billion people.
Individually, take responsibility for our actions. Businesses, be held responsible for the waste that you're putting into the waste stream. Government, stop subsidizing industries that are killing the earth.
And that's what we need to do. We
Yes.
need to focus on these problems. And these are problems that are affecting everyone. We think, well, the folks next door may be producing very little garbage, very little waste. I may be producing a lot. But what I produce, what they produce, we put it all together.
Exactly.
And we've got these gyres that are out there floating around. We have animals that are dying. We have our food that's being poisoned. We have the air that's being polluted. Just look at the cities, and I won't pick on any city, but take Beijing, New Delhi, just on across the board. Many cities in the United States, you have some that are just loaded with air pollution, and that's cutting down on the lives of people who live there, and it's very, very difficult. But this is a major problem. Lauren Singer, I want to thank you so very much for a very interesting and a very informative program.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'm Bill Miller. Thank you for joining us today on Global Connections Television.